All right, so we're going to jump right in with research, which is the R in RMBC. Why do we start with research? Well, you need to understand your market, your customer, the competitors' products that are out there, other solutions, what the market likes about those solutions and what it doesn't like, the pain points, really everything. You need a holistic, broad view of the landscape, and that's the way you're going to write the most effective copy. What ends up happening a lot of the time is that writers kind of think they know the market, and maybe they do know a few things about the market, so they skimp on or skip research entirely. And it's almost always detrimental to copy because they're sort of guessing at what the market wants to hear. But what we can do is actually find out what the market can tell us what they want to hear, what they want us to write about, and all of that. And we can do that in the market's own language, because as you're going to see after we review these questions and that we're going to answer these research questions, we'll actually go and do some examples in real time, and you'll be able to see that you can basically take what the market is saying and then appropriate that into your sales copy, so you're talking to them from their language. So with that being said, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to run through the different research questions that I like to ask and answer, and we're going to do that on a broad level. I'm going to kind of just run through them with you, and then from there, like I said, we'll actually go through and pick a couple examples and do those on screen so you can get a really good feel for what this process looks like. So the first thing we're going to tackle is insights into the demographic of the market that you're targeting, right? So there's some sort of basic questions like who's your customer, what attitudes do they have, what their hopes and dreams are, what their victories and failures are, what outside forces do they believe have prevented their best life, what are their prejudices, and then we're going to sum up their core beliefs about life, love, and family in 1 to 3 sentences. So as far as who your customer is, this would be the stuff like 55 plus, primarily male, middle income, living in the United States or living abroad. Like kind of the basic broader stuff generally. Or like housewives who are between the ages of 40 and 65, whatever it is. You generally will have a feel for this before you start writing the copy. If you don't, there's some analytic tools that you can use that will help to give you these insights, and I'll share those with you in a little bit here. But pretty basic, right? As far as what attitudes do they have, religious, political, social, economic, this stuff's really important because, like, for example, if your market is primarily Christian, then you should know that because the language you use is going to be geared towards other Christians. Or if they're Muslim or Jewish or whatever, like you need to, it's worth knowing or noting that. And if they aren't, if it's a very broad market, if you're writing to a bunch of atheists, if you're writing to like a bunch of, 20-year-old biohackers who are really highly educated and listen to the Tim Ferriss podcast, like a high percentage of those people probably actually aren't religious. And so you have to kind of weigh that. If you're really religious, great, but like you may need to like weigh how you're approaching it. Politics, same thing. Right? If they're all highly skewed conservative, then your language is going to be very different than if they skew liberal. Socially, similar ideas about the role of government. I mean, it's kind of political, but it's also social. What they think about education, just all kinds of social beliefs and things that they may have. We want to capture all that because, again, we want to write when it does come time to write to our audience. We want to do it in a way that we're just reflecting back upon them, that we are a familiar voice to them. We want to be a familiar voice, somebody who they know and trust immediately because we are speaking their language. And same thing with economic too, right? If they're lower class, middle class, upper class, like are they retirees? Are they big savers? Are they big spenders? Are they big shoppers? Like we want to kind of understand their attitudes about the economy in general and things like that. What are their hopes and dreams? Super important because we want to know like what are they really looking to achieve, not just as far as the product goes, but in life, right? Are they looking to retire at a age of 50 or 30 or 40? Are they hoping to live to be 100? Are they hoping to start a business and become a billionaire or a millionaire, right? We want to know what their hopes and dreams are. And we want to know about their victories and failures in life in general, but especially as it pertains to the product. So where have they, and their pain point too, I should say, right? So where have they been successful with their problems so far? And where have they failed? And we want to find all that and capture that information. And then next we want to look at what outside forces do they believe have prevented their best life? So, for example, if they're like, Wall Street is rigged, and that's why I can never get ahead financially, or big pharma is crooked, and their healthcare costs are why I'm not healthy, or if I had just gone to college, I could be a millionaire. People always, not always, but a lot of people have stories that they tell themselves and that they tell others about why they're not where they want to be in their lives. And, in my opinion, it's because it's easier to blame somebody else than to look in the mirror to like actually make really hard concrete changes. So almost all of us have these narratives or stories, and we want to capture the ones that your market is telling consistently. What are their prejudices? So this is their like attitudes, stereotypes, things like that. I don't mean it in like terms of like race or things of that nature, but I mean it as far as like what prejudices do they have? Like Italians are, great cooks or something like that. I mean, that's a silly one, but maybe. Or I was talking with a stylist who she was saying how she's a Latina, and she was talking about how they sort of look at I forget what some other group as having. I guess they're like influencers who dress in like show up in work and like yoga outfits and stuff like that, and she was saying how to them like that's like silly and dumb, and because like they like to dress up and look their best, and so that for her and her tribe that wouldn't make sense to show up to like do in the office in like yoga pants. So that's sort of like a prejudice because like, oh, these like kind of influencer millennial people showing up in yoga pants, or they don't get it, right? And like if your market has a belief like that and you can then reflect that in the copy, it's another way of signaling, hey, I understand, I'm one of you, you're totally right. And if you can do that, you build rapport and trust, and it's going to be a lot easier to sell to those people down the road. And then finally, we want to sum up their core beliefs about life, love, and family in 1 to 3 sentences. So this is really where we sum up kind of like a statement of who this person is. So they're typically between the ages of 45 and 65, and they believe that the economy is rigged and the political system is broken, but that's something they can live with because family is everything. They think that marriage is sacred, and they believe that the greatest gift in the world is being a loving parent to children and grandchildren. Something like that maybe, or something that just sums up their core beliefs. So we want to do that as well. So like I mentioned, I'm going to do a couple of examples of research and record myself doing them in real time for you, and a couple different verticals. And so we'll cover all of these, and you'll see concrete examples. And I know examples are really helpful, but I'd rather just run through each of the things here first, and then that way I can do the research in one fell swoop instead of having to be more disjointed. And with that being said, let's move on to the next part of this, which is other existing solutions. So one of the questions we've got is, what is the market already using? We want to list that out. So if they're using, if you're doing weight loss, then are they using other supplements? Are they using their dieting, keto, personal trainers, gym memberships, workout courses online, whatever they're listing, and we're gonna we'll find out places to find these answers. We want to list these out, and we want to know what has their experience been like with these existing solutions that the market's already using. So, really like, are they using them a lot? Do they use them a little? Do they stop using them? Like, what has their experience been like? And then really these two are almost like sub bullets of this one, because we're like, all right, well, what is the market like about the existing solutions? So maybe it's that it's fast and easy. Maybe it's that they've gotten results, they have lost weight. Maybe they feel like it's something that they can do even though they're elderly, or they have some kind of pre-existing health condition, but they can still lose weight, using the weight loss example. Whatever it is, we want to capture all that. And then we also want to capture what the market dislikes about the existing solution. So maybe it's hard, or it's a starvation diet, or the ingredients give them diarrhea, whatever it is. We want to capture that as well. I'm like, why do we want to capture that? Well, simple, because when we're going to be selling our product or solution to them, we want to know if what they like about existing solutions is also incumbent or inherent in the solution that we are offering. We want to point that out. But then we also want to differentiate, right? How is ours different? Well, unlike other solutions that have this thing that you don't like, our solution doesn't have those things? Or do you hate this about, you buy a product and it has this thing that you dislike? Us too. That's why we created our product, so it doesn't have that solution, product or service, right? Does that make sense? We have to know what the market's actually thinking, because the whole time a prospect is going through the sales copy, not the whole time, but especially as you're sharing your product with them and that part of the copy, they're thinking about like, okay, well, is this really different than something I've tried in the past? Or they're thinking about stuff that they've tried in the past that's similar, that didn't get them with the results that they wanted, or maybe got them some results that they wanted, but some that there were side effects or things they didn't like about it. And so we want to be able to talk to all that and answer those objections while highlighting and strengthening our product and also differentiating it from other solutions. This question is really cool too, right? Are there horror stories about existing solutions? The reason we want to find that out, and again, I'll show you where to find them, is if there are true horror stories, we can take those and use those in our sales copy. They make really compelling copy. If you can share stories about existing solutions where people use them and things went horribly wrong, then that will captivate and capture people, get their attention. Plus, obviously, it can really help to discredit or dissuade them from thinking that another solution is better than yours. This is a really fundamental question, but does the market believe that existing solutions work? Because there's really different types of customers, and if they believe that there are existing solutions that work already, then you actually have more work to do, right? It's fine, but like if you're selling, if you're trying to sell fuel for cars and you're like trying to be like, because we all know gasoline doesn't work, then the market's going to be like, screw you, of course it works. Like I put gas in my car every week or every 2 weeks and my car runs, right? So you have to then work harder. However, if you're trying to sell something that is I guess more like, you maybe get a get rich, become a millionaire thing, there's probably more of a jaded market there where people, there's a portion of the market that believes that, yeah, if I invest properly, I can become a millionaire. But there's a lot of people believing no. Why? For reasons up above, their prejudices and what's prevented them from living their best life. Like, well, I don't make enough money. I don't have a job because I don't have a college degree. I don't have, I'm a bad saver. I'm bad with money. I have bad credit, right? All of these things. And then so they maybe believe that may influence them and make them think that existing solutions don't work. And so if that's the case and they don't believe that existing solutions work, then we want to answer that question with like, why don't they believe it? Okay, so moving on, we've got 2 more sections of this to go through before we get into doing some live real-time examples. The first one here is about curiosity. So we're going to answer some questions that are curiosity related, and I'll explain why. So the first question is, has someone tried to solve the market's pain points before in a very unique way? And if they have, what was the result? The reason I love this it's really a pair of questions. And what we really want to find is if there was an attempt in the past to solve like the market's pain points, then we can kind of go with this whole idea of what was like, a lost discovery that's been rediscovered, or a lost solution that's been rediscovered. Or we may find stories about suppression, right? That somebody had the answer in the past, but then it got kind of hidden or buried away or whatever it is. Or maybe if it's from the 1940s or 30s or whatever it is, there may be some cool old attempt that is unique, but then has been forgotten. And people love the whole idea of what's old is new again. People love this idea of ancient wisdom, that we have all the solutions, that everyone believes that they're living in the most complicated and complex time of in existence, and that the people before them had it easier. And that's been true since the beginning of modernity, really. Modernity? I don't know how you're supposed to say that, but it's been true since like the beginning, basically. And maybe it is true because it is an ever increasingly complex world that we live in. But as a result of that, people love to latch on to stuff of how, back in simpler times, things were solved this way and it was really easy. So by going through and looking at old attempts at solving the market's pain points, you can find some really cool gold. And what you can also do is find kind of these conspiratorial stories about old solutions as well. So like, for example, if there was a who killed the electric car, the idea that we actually could have had electric cars in like the 80s or whatever it was, but GM killed it, right? That's a conspiratorial story. Ideas of in health conspiracies about how people don't want remedies getting out, or big pharma is really after you, or in like finance, and it's like the billionaires and Wall Street fat cats don't actually want you to succeed. I mean, there's always interesting. There's a lot of surprising and kind of interesting conspiratorial stories throughout history, and those can make for a really great sales copy. So that's why we're looking for this. And then I already kind of mentioned this, but the idea of if there are any older attempts to solve the problems pre-1960 that are unique, because again, they are going to be unique, especially older ones. Generally, it's just inherently going to be different than what we're trying to do today to solve the problem, and it can make for really interesting copy, or even for interesting ways of selling the product or service or solution to people. And then we want to answer for older attempts: what happened? Were they successful but forgotten? Were they a failure, and why? I have two examples here that I've been using for a long time, but they're good ones. So, one is that Tesla in the energy space. There's the idea that like big energy and Edison and General Electric didn't want him sharing his energy discoveries with the world, and so he was discredited and shamed, and he died broke and a broken man, and never got the love he deserved, but that really he was ahead of his time. And so finding that if you have like a solar charger or a battery and you can tie it back to Tesla, it's kind of been done a lot at this point, honestly, but potentially it could be a unique way of presenting your product or service. And then the other one, which is one of my favorites ever, is for foot fungus, which I've used this example before, but it's worth me talking about because you may have never seen me teach before. And basically in World War II, and this is completely true, I found a really cool report by doing research and looking for old solutions, so doing exactly what I'm telling you to do. I found how during World War II, for a lot of American troops who were stationed overseas in the South Pacific, athletes' feet and foot fungus was a huge issue because they were in these tropical environments, and they're wearing shoes and wool socks all day long, and they're in ditches, and people were just foot fungus was this huge issue. And at any given time, it was something like 5 to 10% of our fighting forces weren't actually combat ready because of their foot fungus, and people were going to the medics all the time, and all this stuff was happening. And so the Surgeon General and the government freaked out about this, and they started looking for solutions that could help to end this foot fungus problem. And they tested a bunch of stuff, and there's a whole great story there. And basically they finally succeeded by using a product called undecylenic acid, which is effective and clinically shown and FDA cleared to say that it basically cures or treats foot fungus and stuff like that, and it made a huge difference. So by finding that story, I could, if I'm writing a foot fungus product, a topical of undecylenic acid, could talk about the forgotten foot fungus treatment that helped the U.S. win World War II, or helped the troops win World War II, something like that. And that's a really interesting headline and hook and angle to take. And it's even though this ingredient isn't over the counters and stuff you can buy on Amazon right now, it's how do I make that sexy? Well, I tell this amazing story about the how there's this race against the clock to help America win World War II. And if I'm targeting 50 plus conservative men and women in America, they're gonna love that story, right? Cool. Okay, cool. And then the last one here is going to be corruption, which kind of ties it up above in the curiosity component of the conspiratorial story and things like that. But really, it's this idea, more specifically, that the market's pain point used to not exist, or it used to not be so bad, right? If there's a belief about that, it's really valuable. And is there a belief that it's been recently exacerbated by outside forces? And if so, what are those forces, and what's the reason behind their presence? So I kind of call this the the fall from Eden type approach here, which is this idea of again, used to be a simpler time, right? And here's the same thing, that lots of there used to be fewer problems in the world, now there's more, and it's because of some outside corrupting force. So I have the example of obesity and diabetes because of Dr. Ancel Keys. And if you look at that, in 1948, Eisenhower had a stroke. The public got really freaked out. Dr. Ancel Keys was a doctor who basically stepped into the limelight and said, I've got the solution. It is fats are the enemy, basically. And because of him, we completely inverted the food pyramid. He promoted, low fat, lots of grains, things like that. All of the food industry kind of changed to meet what Dr. Keyes did. And as a result of that, we've been actually eating this fucked up diet for the last 70 plus years, where if you look at the charts, diabetes has skyrocketed, cancer has skyrocketed, obesity has skyrocketed, heart disease has skyrocketed, all these diseases have skyrocketed, and it happened really right in alignment with when we changed our diets. But because it would be the food industry and government and everyone has such a vested interest in keeping the food system the way it is now, including grain and agriculture, it's very hard to get them to change. And so the advice you're getting is not the right advice, and really you should be flipping the food pyramid on its head and eating more fats and vegetables and things of that nature, but less carbs. So that's the whole corruption angle applied to like keto. There's always this idea of like anytime you can find like an isolated group of people, like a tribe in like some country or whatever, where they don't have a problem that we have, like where blood sugar doesn't exist or foot fungus doesn't exist or whatever it is, and then you can talk about like why don't they have what we do, and then you can tie it to corruption. Or there's like stuff like where you have all these uncontacted or people who were pretty isolated up until the 60s or 70s, and were all really healthy and in good shape, and then the West came and made contact with them. They started drinking Coca-Cola and doing this and that, and then they all got fat and sick and unhealthy. So those are ideas there. But again, it's not just for health. I mean, you could look at the American dream. You can look at retirement, investing, right? It used to be that every middle-class family could have a house, like own their home and have a roof over their heads. But now it's really hard. Why? Well, greedy banks and Wall Street, and maybe there's some program the government passed in the 70s. Whatever it is, you just find that solution and find out how it corrupted things, right? So that's the research document here. As far as where we find research, or answers to our research, it's really just two places for me more than anything. It's Amazon, it's forums, and then I guess the third would be just Googling. And I'm going to show you how to do all that here in the very next module.